So some of you will recall one of my videos last year of this BMW F30 320D, where we worked in collaboration with a few of our partners, KL Auto to autofoam its chassis, Preferred Wheels in Glenmary to redo its roof lining, DK Schweitzer to re-upholster the leather seats, and CSB Pro to upgrade its headlights, and of course finally Mike's Garage to upgrade its suspension to STXA coilovers. So the owner of this car is from Penang, and now the car is back in our custody, having just returned to Mike's Garage for some retuning of its suspension and also upgrades to its performance with a DNA Stage 2 engine plus transmission tune. So now, after Mike's team has gotten their job done, I'm bringing this car out for a validation drive. Right, so okay, now let me just share with you the context of what we are trying to achieve in terms of results. Now, the owner of this car, his daily commute is a 100-kilometer drive from his home to office, which is why you can see how a diesel appeals to him. So therefore, the objective of our tune should be to ensure that, well, he gets that added level of sportiness to the car's character, and that means better high-speed stability, better road holding, a more responsive engine, but at the same time, ensure that the right quality over, well, poor and undulating surfaces remain unaffected. And also when coming up to traffic jam conditions, the car does not become undrivable. So my commute for today, well, I'm starting off here in PJ, and on my way to EvoClub Car Wash in Sungai Besi, I am going to be stopping by USJ and also Segambut, both to check out on a couple of customer cars, which, well, that gives us that bit of distance for me to evaluate the behavior of this car as close as possible to the kind of usage context that this customer goes through. So initial impressions as I drive off, firstly, the ride is good. I just drove over, well, a patch of road, and yes, you can feel the texture of the road below, but the suspension just smoothens out all the sharp edges. So what you feel is that, yes, you feel that there is some unevenness to the surface, but the harshest edges of the surface is polished off smoothly by the suspension. And I'm coming up to a sharp turn, turning into the bend. The car remains commendable in its poise. Now, coming up to a speed bump, goes over it pretty well. You see, the thing with most sport suspension is that most of them, well, you increase that firmness in exchange for improved body control, in exchange for reduced roll around corners. But the trade-off usually is that the ride just feels busier. You get a lot more noise filtering in from below. It sort of distracts you from the driving. And worst of all, what happens is that when your suspension is overly stiff, overly firm, when you are going over less than ideal patches of road, what you get is, you see, there isn't enough travel on the suspension. And as a result, when your car goes over the surfaces, the wheels aren't in contact with the surface consistently enough for you to have confident control. Now, off the line, acceleration is just impressive. I barely feathered the throttle and the car just leaps off the line. Okay, like, see, I was just turning over a very, very bad patch of road, and yeah, The car moved up and down a bit, but it hardly felt uncomfortable. This car, the engine has taken up a stage 2 tune, and most of the time when you go stage 2, it's about dialing up the boost. So as we all know, and the reason why I always recommend DNA tuning, with all due respect to other tunes in the market, is that the philosophy of DNA tuning, they don't give you the highest outright, power or torque, but they focus very much on drivability. So what it means is that it gives you less outright performance, but more usable day-to-day performance. I have to admit that right now, in the current context that I'm driving the car, I'm utilizing barely, I think, 10 or 20% of its performance potential. Initial impressions, having driven from PJ to USJ here, and firstly, the suspension in the context of short to mid-distance urban driving is extremely well set up. So typically, when you go sporty on your suspension, the normally accepted trade-off is that you get a busier ride, and that is still true here. But the sacrifice of comfort that you make with the STXA here is of a very minimal degree. And of course, granted that this is also maintained by having Mike's team regularly give the suspension a proper tune-up, a check once in a while to ensure that everything is in order. So previously, this car was on some stiffer anti-roll bars, which made the ride even firmer. And this time around, when he sent the car down to us, he sent it together with the original anti-roll bars that Mike fitted back onto the car, and that helped add another layer of pliancy to the ride, whilst at the same time enhancing its road holding, enhancing its stability, enhancing the confidence it gives to the driver on the road. You see, the thing is this: going stiff is all well and good when you are on a smooth racetrack, but out in the open world, you have undulating road surfaces, you have potholes, you have patches of road here, there, everywhere that threaten to just throw off your car at any moment. So when you are dealing with unpredictable surfaces like this, you need that pliancy, you need that compliance to the road to ensure that even when the wheels are disturbed, the tires maintain contact to the ground. And remember, your 4 tires are the only contact patches that you have on the road. So imagine if your suspension is too stiff. What happens is that when there's a form of disturbance, there's not enough travel of the suspension. As a result, very frequently your tires don't get adequate contact to the road surface, and that affects your control of the car. So the bottom line is, when you are tuning a suspension for road use, you must maintain a degree of compliance. No, it's non-negotiable, right? It is non-negotiable. Now, what about the engine? So, as I mentioned earlier, DNA Tuning's package has given this car a stage 2 engine and transmission remap. And well, it has made the car a lot more responsive. Okay, and is it undrivable, which sometimes can be the case with certain overly aggressive tunes, when you just prod on the throttle a little, the car feels like it wants to jump. Well, this one doesn't. So right now, let's say like I'm driving here in this kind of USJ traffic jam. All right, if I prod the throttle gently along, well, the initial travel of your throttle still translates to a moderate, easy to modulate response. But when I see a stretch of road and I gun it, it pulls. Now, the thing is, of course, because this is a stage 2, you still have to make some provisions, you still have to make some allowances, you have to be very careful, very selective of the kind of circumstances that you, never mind full throttle, just to flex the accelerator a little past half throttle, that already unleashes a relentless amount of acceleration. Okay, so right now I'm in Segambut. Look at my surroundings. Okay, this is not what I would call, well, a smooth surface. What is what I like to call the Klang seafood restaurant parking kind of surface. And the suspension, well, this is not a place I would go fast in, but it didn't, it does not feel like it struggled to go over that. It coped with the surface admirably. So from the last time I checked in at USJ, I've driven the car through the NKVE and made it here to Segambut. And as we all know, the roads here in Segambut aren't particularly pleasant. So we do have to go a bit slow. But it's not uncomfortable. The ride is not uncomfortable. Now, on the highways, what I experienced earlier was that the combination of its drivability and its effortless performance, well, makes this a good kind of setup that you can use if your daily commute involves covering a lot of distances in a day, and maybe if you have to make a few stops. So let's say, like, if you are in the sales line where one day you may have to see 2 or 3 different clients, each of it in disparate locations, that effortless torque delivery from the engine comes in very, very handily to give you a much less fatigued driving experience. So right now, the final leg of my journey, as I head up to EvoClub Car Wash, it's thus far been a breeze of a ride. Now, I am mindful, however, that because this is still a highly tuned performance setup, there was not one occasion where I actually even needed to exert anything more than half the throttle travel. In fact, most of the time, the most that I actually need to use of the accelerator pedal is about 20 to 30% of its travel. Now, the only downside to this tune is that as I'm driving now in heavy traffic and occasions when you are stuck behind clueless drivers who do not move aside when a faster car comes behind, that's when you feel kind of, you feel that frustration. But credit to the DNA setup, the accelerator pedals tuning such that if you just maintain a steady throttle pressure at, just like a minute steady throttle pressure, the car doesn't have that itching to go forward, itching to leap forward kind of feeling that a lot of highly tuned cars have. This one does not. It does not have that that spiky kind of torque delivery. This one, it's still relatively easy to modulate. Of course, the frustration is that because in situations like, let's say right now I'm ambling along at 80 kilometers per hour, what's happening is that the engine is ticking along at just below the boost threshold. And what this means is that if you need to have a sudden burst of acceleration, there is that inevitable lag in its response, which is nothing to not the fault of the tune, but rather simply the laws of physics. But when you get going, when you build that momentum, once you are like on song, the way this car accelerates, gathers speed, it's insane. So the most important take back that I have now, having driven this car from PJ to USJ to Segambut, now heading into downtown KL and coming to this traffic jam, is that the performance is suitably enhanced. The ride and handling is confidence inspiring. It is a well-judged setup for day-to-day use. Now, of course, there is a lot more performance to access when you have a clear stretch of road. But what we have here is that you have a setup that is, well, catered to unleash the maximum potential of the engine. But if you just need to amble along in city traffic where there's limited space to fully utilize the engine's performance, this is still a comfortable, usable day-to-day car.